Welcome to the 12 Days of Edition Wars, featuring 2nd edition AD&D players and DM's options books. In this marathon series, we are taking a close look at a set of special books that are often considered D&D 2.5. On the 7th day of Edition Wars, my DM gave to me 7 Spells of Casting, Spells and Magic, Part 1. So in this book, we get a lot of different ways of approaching spellcasting and magic and how to create stories about magic and the fantastical. And I mean, I think I've talked before about just how small the typeface gets between different books in this series. Mm-hmm. And this book is the real offender. The typeface is very small. The pages are very cramped. It's lucky for me, anyway, that when I got this book, I was not 38. Call it what it is. My eyes weren't great then, but they have not improved.
For me, it's very evocative of the 3rd edition books because those things were so hard for me to read. Tiny, tiny font. And in that case, the background was that sort of brownish parchment paper color with lines on it meant to look like a notebook or whatever. And so different depths of brown at different places. Sometimes it was white background, sometimes it was more brown. And it was so hard to read. And this is very much like that, except it has a pure white background, but everything is so crammed in. And there's the art compared to the other books that we've looked at in this series, there's not as much of it. So
yeah, it's much art lighter, though there's still a pretty fair amount.
Sure, but I just mean in terms of that means that there are now places where you have 4 or 5 pages in a row with maybe 1 half-page art piece amongst them.
Yeah, for sure. Now, even this is probably not my high water mark for just cramped, illegible text in a 2nd edition book. That award, that there is no prize for this award situation, goes to the Complete Necromancer's Handbook. I don't know if you recall it, but it was the one. It's the one class book that is a blue cover, because they're not really sure this book is for PCs. There's some PC content in there, but
yeah, it's kind of it's in the vein of Sages and Specialists, right? Which is also a blue cover, but it's really for the DM.
But most of those blue covers were fairly generously font sized and so on. Complete Necromancers is a real outlier. It is teeny tiny font. They had a page count and a word count, and those things did not correlate to each other well.
Yeah.
I tell you. Now, maybe the most famous case of just an illegible book in all of tabletop gaming goes to the legendary Secret of Zeron, where something went horribly awry with the printer, but having gone awry, there was no money to fix it. And so it is black text on a gray page with silver or gray patterning on the page, and there's just no hope in this book. Like, my friend Colin for Tribality wrote a couple of articles about the Secret of Zeron, having discovered that the secret was, I don't know, find some other way to read it than the printed book. And he's very into the game and what it's offering. It just was a total flop because no one could read the book.
Yeah, that's too bad.
And there was no way to correct it. Anyway, back to the book at hand. We would certainly be never known to digress at length.
Never. No. Not at any time before. This is so odd.
So the first chapter of this book is it's interesting that they bother to cover it, to be honest with you. There's a discussion, sure, how to integrate this book into your campaign is something we saw extensively in Combat and Tactics, right? That's not a surprise. A little more surprising is the section on the role of magic in the campaign, and sort of a discussion of all the different say levers you can pull when presenting magic as a DM. Talks about scarcity, mystery, power, cost, worldview, all of these things. And I think it's always interesting when D&D makes any suggestions that deviate from its own purported baseline. I mean, I'm always here for D&D making an effort to support different kinds of stories than whatever you might see its core story as being. But in part, this is me kicking against a bunch of Twitter threads that have gotten under my skin lately. So there you go.
The thing that's interesting to me, this is a very, relatively speaking, long introduction chapter, but it actually talks about some things that possibly at this point in time people hadn't really actually addressed in very much depth. Or maybe I should say it like this, that had not been written in an official Dungeons and Dragons book and discussed with very much depth. Things like talking about the power level of magic, and talking about scarcity and what that does to a setting, and talking about, what the actual worldview would be in a setting, if you change the idea of how the normal person in a setting, a commoner in a setting, thinks about magic, right? Is it rare? Is it common? Does everybody have a little bit of it? Does no one have access to it? All those sorts of things. These are things that players have been talking about for a long time, because of course, up until this point, there was always this huge disparity. In fact, during this, there was a huge disparity between what a fighter can do and what a wizard could do, or what a magic user could do, of course, right?
Right, the famous linear fighter, quadratic wizard.
Right, exactly. And so you get that conversation happening a lot, but that was set in a different context, right? This is now talking about, well, what if you think about it just in terms of the setting itself? Forget about the power level of individual PCs compared to each other, even though they're different classes, and think about what's happening in the world as a setting. What is the world view? I think that's at least instructive. So while I have some not necessarily generous things to say about this book in some cases, I guess my most generous read of at least this first chapter is, they're trying to open a conversation and maybe provide a different, a way to talk about it with a different point of view. And I respect that. I think it's maybe a good thing.
Right. And I think that what the book is going to go on to give us is a lot of stuff that has interesting, inventive ideas, but they all sort of, I think they're all going to lean toward magic is rare and difficult, rather than magic is fun and exciting.
Right.
Right.
Well, because I think the ethos or the prevailing thought up until this point was that magic is fun and exciting and very, very powerful, and so that's what brings up that problem of the linear fighter and quadratic wizard, that magic is so powerful and fun that it's just way too powerful. So now we have to find a way to talk about it in different terms.
Sure.
I mean, good or bad, right? I'm not actually making a judgment about that.
I get you. And so, that makes the book a lot harder to engage with, and it's why they need a how to adopt this into your campaign section. But it makes the book much harder to engage with if you are looking for something with the same tone as core second edition D&D, and just more depth and nuance, as opposed to well, I want a lower, scarier magic tone, which is what most of the new content in this book is going to sell.
Oh, so you're saying that the book is actually almost a bait and switch, right?
I think it's an outlier.
The idea of it makes it seem like, oh, spells and magic, here's new and improved ways to integrate really cool magical uses into your game, when really it's here's how to limit magic use.
Well, and to be fair, there's a whole bunch of new spells in this book, and those spells work fine within the ordinary paradigm of second edition. And there's probably, some of them have become really, really core familiar things thanks to 3.0 and thereafter, and some have stayed on the margins very much. And we'll get into what some of those are, but probably not this episode, because that's in the appendix. But it is, I think, going to be interesting enough that our listeners are going to want to hear about it. Anyway, I think we can probably launch into Chapter 1, Wizards, which is very much a deeper and more, I'm going to say, thinly sliced version of the Skills and Powers Wizard. If you took this chapter and just put it directly into Skills and Powers, it would only feel out of place in that it digs so much deeper than any other class other than priests are getting, right? Mm-hmm. With still more new types of new ways to specialize, and then far more point-buy class abilities at start of play. I mean, when we saw this in Skills and Powers, there was a roughly, normal number of options for the wizard compared to other classes, and a roughly normal number of optional limitations, and that time has passed. We are now leaping in headfirst into uncharted water of many, many, many features. And it isn't that they aren't interesting. I don't mean that at all. It's just they are overwhelming, and as with any point-buy system, there's an enormous amount of pressure to find exploits. This feels like it wants you to figure out how to exploit it. And, a lot of the limitations are things that you can very consciously just turn into not being limitations. For example, weapons restriction.
Right.
As a 3-point restriction, the wizard may never have proficiency in any weapon. Okay. You're a wizard. After about a 3rd level, you didn't have a bunch of business using weapons anyway. I would say 5th level at the absolute outside. After that point, you just have no business using a staff or a dagger as a weapon rather than as a magical implement, because it isn't locking you out of using staffs as magic items. For example, as a 5-point restriction, the wizard is not allowed to attempt to wield any weapon at all and may never try to injure another creature with a weapon. I guess I'm kind of assuming that something like a staff of fire is not injuring another creature with a weapon. But if you did...
Yeah, I guess it depends on how strictly you're using the term weapon, right?
Right. And
because, weapons in the more modern editions only apply to non-magical, non-silvered objects that you're using to directly damage another creature. But a magical weapon is a different thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then doing so renders all spell use impossible for the character for at least 1 full month. Well, honestly, by that point, it's 5 free points. Like, if you're gonna get the 3-point version, just go ahead and get the 5-point version. You're not going to do this. You have decided you're not going to do this. So what's the problem? And I also have questions about.
I mean, does your fist count as a weapon? I mean,
well, sure,
because if it was also very popular to have all of the party members captured and thrown in a dungeon and they have to escape, or they don't have any equipment, or what I mean. So
sure,
then the wizard can't even punch anyone. I mean, that's kind of an outside situation, but.
Well, right. And if you happened to have a spell that conjured a weapon, let's call it Mordenkainen's Sword or Black-Bladed Disaster, to just cite one that I'm fairly sure is in second ed and one that I'm absolutely sure is in second ed. Are those weapons? If not, why not?
Right. Well, that's why I said the thing about, the definition of weapon is very narrow, and a magical weapon does not fall into that, right? It's not. It's a question.
Anyway, if you can approach this section thinking of it as this would be an interesting thing about my character and not I need to go grub for points, then it's pretty fun. At least to my eyes, once you're grubbing for points here, the narrative is just really lost in a hurry, and that is a shame because it's trying to do interesting narrative stuff in its own way. But I mean, it's so overpowered. Like the 10-point version of the 10 and 15-point versions of Dispel. I'm sorry, you have Dispel Magic at first level? Okay. Can we talk about that? It would sort of be my take, at least now looking back at it, and I'm fairly sure it would have been my take at the time, because that's powerful mojo in second edition. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can be, and a lot of different ways that wizards can be, and if you were approaching it as a very, very wizard-heavy campaign, then this would be fascinating to see like all the different infinite diversity and infinite combinations that spilled out of it for who wizards are.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that this book, it goes very it provides these very sort of relatively detailed explanations of the different schools of magic, right? The schools of philosophy. So you've got your general abjuration, things like divination, necromancy, illusion. And then you've got schools of effect. So you've got air, earth, fire, water, dimensions. You've got schools of thaumaturgy. So you've got artifice, alchemy, geometry, and then there's the universal schools. I mean, so you've got these ideas where, you can produce a party with 5 different wizards that are all very, very different. You can have a necromancer, an elementalist, you can have a shadow mage, you can have a mentalist, you can have a force mage, and all of those would create a sort of interesting mix. Does a really good job of pointing out the differences between those individuals. Even though they're all magic wielders, they are very different. And so I respect it for that. I like it for that, but I agree with the basis of what you were saying.
Yeah. And honestly, like, that's interesting enough that I think I'm ready to see D&D try something like that again. Try a supplement that is consciously saying everyone is, doing some arcane magic, even if they're also doing other stuff. Taking a bit of a page from the third ed Gestalt rules. But also what I want to say is that a lot of the more unusual ideas in this book, such as the kinds of specialists that you can have, since I think this is the first time we see Elementalist, Dimensionalist, Force Mage, Mentalist, and Shadow Mage as statements. A lot of these are going to keep circulating and percolating through D&D down through the editions. Shadow Mage especially springs to mind from the very late 3.5 Tome of Magic and Heroes of Shadow kind of stuff.
I do want to come back to something, and that is that, so you said you think D&D might be ready for this sort of thing again, but here's my issue with that. In 5th edition, almost every single class has arcane casting ability.
Yep.
And the ones that don't, a lot of them have divine magic casting ability. So there are only a couple of classes that do not have the ability to wield arcane powers. So, that I'm not making a judgment or statement about the goodness or badness of that, but it greatly hobbles the appropriateness of a book like this, because back when this was produced, not everyone had the ability to use magic just whenever they wanted.
For sure. And I'm not sort of suggesting that you can't play a single class campaign or a campaign with any other kind of constraint. I mean more that I want to see a product that consciously explores it and sort of leans into it as maybe it's a micro setting, maybe it's a very narrow campaign concept, but one that the product talks about how to explore. And the DM's Guild is here for this. It doesn't have to be from the hand of Chris Perkins himself to be valid. I'm just saying. So right. I think there's some interesting stuff bouncing around here.
I agree, but I guess my point is, like, for me, is there really room for this? Because there already is spellcasting ability for every class almost. And to me, that's sort of what this book brings. Is for second edition, this book brought the ability to have more than one spellcaster as a major party member, and it separated what they could do and what kind of powers and abilities they had, which is what...
Well, it sort of did.
Well, sort of, right. But I mean, at the time, it did, right? In a way that came from TSR, right? It came from the actual creators of the game.
What it doesn't do is break them out of their combat role. Mm-hmm. They're going to be either damage focused or control focused or utility focused, but they're not going to be a party defender. They're not going to be a party healer. They're probably not bringing a lot to the table in terms of buffs. No more than any other wizard. Like, there's a very constrained concept of what a wizard can be on that level, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Anyway, that's sort of all neither here nor there in terms of talking about this book. But I still like to see them explore.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
I mean, I'm all for exploration. I'm not actually saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's very different. It's just very different. The need for different magical niches or different magical abilities in 5th edition is a very different need than it was in 2nd edition.
That's definitely true.
So,
and someday when I write the history of the wizard class in D&D for Tribality,
you're going to get stuck on this particular book.
I'm going to be almost copying this chapter word for word when you get into, here's each kind of specialization and the special things they get. Oh, mercy. Because they're all presented in paragraph form. Nothing is broken out into bullet points for presentation.
And the only thing in tables is what the requirements or whatever. Yeah, you have to be a certain race, a certain ability. Yeah, that's it. Everything else is long form paragraph.
Yeah, it's incredibly punishing to try to extract meaning from it, and it's okay. It's just a lot of things about information presentation have changed since the late 90s in books, and I think it's commonly agreed that layout and information presentation books still isn't there, but this one's a doozy.
Also, it does that somehow very necessary thing of making you purchase other books to be fully usable. For example, page 23, for those of you following along at home, the bottom of the right-hand column says, Wild Surge, talking about wild magic, right? Wild surges are strange manifestations of the randomness of wild magic. A complete table for wild surges appears in the Tome of Magic, the actual book, Tome of Magic. But if a copy of that book isn't available, use the random chart for the Wand of Wonder in the magical item description of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Note that a number of wild magic spells appear in the Tome of Magic and the Wizard Spell Compendium. If you're really interested in playing a wild mage, you should obtain one or both of those accessories. And also if not, then you need to get the DMG and look at the Wand of Wonder,
right.
which tells you a little bit about the Wand of Wonder, but that's a digression.
Right. And in fairness to second edition, I recall my perspective at the time as really being, okay, the Tome of Magic is the fourth core book.
Sure.
Because it was one of the early releases, and certainly from this remove, it is hard to remember that some of those spells weren't straight up core.
Interestingly, this chapter ends with a half page on dealing with game-breaking characters. And
it's like they knew that a point-buy system had some issues.
Yes.
Point limits. The DM can limit the number of additional powers purchased by a wizard by setting a limit of 60 or 70 points of optional abilities. Cool. All right. I guess we know what the score is.
Right. Limitations with a vengeance. A player may think he's getting away with something when he takes a couple of beliefs or of environmental condition limitations, but a good DM can always find a way to bring these role-playing disadvantages into play. But let me point out that takes a certain table culture.
Absolutely. And that there's a particular phrasing of advice that gets under my skin like almost nothing else.
Right.
The phrasing, but a good DM can always find a way. So if I'm having a problem, it's because I'm not a good enough DM. And that is the universal answer for all problems while being a DM? Cool. Thanks. That is, I have heard that in far too many arguments.
Yeah. Well, and then there's this, Jim. By looking for situations where the super character's built-in weaknesses cripple him, the DM can graphically illustrate how out of balance the character actually is. In other words, you're not even condoning, but promoting the idea that the DM, if they're a good DM, is going to strategically gimp a particular PC just to prove a point.
Yeah.
At some point during the campaign. And that's why I say it takes a certain type of table culture. And unfortunately, that was very common. I'm not appending that sentence with "and also very fun," because usually it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody wants their character to be gimped. If you spent an hour and a half setting this up so that your point-buy special wizard is totally rocking your socks
then you
and is
work
the most
really
awesome
fast.
thing. And I was just throwing out numbers, right? But I'm just saying, right? You spend a lot of time on it. You don't want to just be gimped because the DM feels like they need to pay you back, right? It's
right. Like it is. So for the most part, the second edition trended away from the GM as the holder of the stick for the table dynamic, and it's disheartening to see it come back with such a vengeance here. We've talked about it a lot in Gygax's text, and it hasn't gone anywhere in the conversation about gaming. Go to the massive 5e Facebook group, and you'll see what I mean.
So that's what I was going to say. In some ways, they have to address it, but. Yeah, I mean, here's the next thing. Oh, the bad guys are supermen too. Naturally, if one character is a walking arsenal of powers and abilities, it stands to reason that some NPCs might have similar skills. No matter how tough a particular PC is, there's always someone in the game world who's a little tougher. And meeting that NPC is a super character's worst nightmare. While this tactic isn't particularly elegant, it's quite effective in letting the player know just how it feels to be in the place of the poor NPCs his character has been terrorizing. So, first of all, that assumes that the character is going to be terrorizing every NPC, which may or may not be true. But also, it tells the DM once again, get revenge on that PC. Show them how small they actually are by making the world have several layers of hierarchy that are always allows for one to be more powerful than the PCs, which I suppose, is a way of looking at the structure of a campaign, but as it says, it's not particularly elegant. So, anything else about wizards? I mean, let's be honest. You and I could talk about this chapter for like 4 hours.
Oh, for sure. And I think it covers it to our listener satisfaction, at least. I mean, if you had a favorite weird optional ability or optional limitation, that would maybe round us out nicely.
I mean, a favorite? Not really, to be honest. What I really like about the chapter is the way that it describes the different schools in the beginning. Because I think it's a really nice way to just show the range of what you could get if you specialize, what you could focus on if you specialize. And, for a long time, the wizard, quote, wizard or mage, was just, that's just a bucket full of magic, right? And instead of a specialist of any type. So I do like that. I don't particularly have a favorite one, though. Not really.
Okay. So as a category, my favorite are the different abilities that let you sort of pseudo multi-class into grabbing some features from another class, because it plays like a subclass, right? You are now a functional subclass of wizard, and you are operative in a wider range of circumstances. So you've got thief ability, weapon selection, priestly wizard, that kind of thing. I think that's neat.
So I do actually have a favorite. I changed my mind.
All right.
My favorite is the geometer, but we already talked about it in skills and powers.
Okay.
But here's the thing. I love the idea of it more than I love the implementation, because I think it's the idea of it is really awesome. And if I was going to be a PC, I'd have to put a lot of role playing into, how I'm drawing the symbols and this, that, and the other crap. But the actual implementation isn't really all that special. So, like it doesn't really evoke that. That's left for the player to role play.
Right, and it sort of comes across as just a more different abjurer.
Right.
So
right. Yeah.
It's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. So whatever. Yeah. Okay, so you want to move on to the priests?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, priests.
It does a similar treatment on priests, except instead of having schools, of course, it has spheres of access.
And spheres of access are the clear precursor to third ed domains, and those are in turn a fairly muddled precursor to fourth ed builds and fifth ed domains.
Right.
Things have changed around a lot in terms of how different a priest is based on who they serve or what their deal is.
So remember also, priests aren't just clerics. They're clerics, crusaders, druids, monks, and what's the last one? Oh, shamans. Right?
Sure.
So remember, priest is a category in second edition. It's not a class. It's a
parent class.
Yeah, it's a parent class.
And, I mean, the idea of looking at all these spheres and then jumping into monk is sort of
right.
Wait, but what?
Right. Well, because the spheres include elemental spheres, so air, earth, fire, water, right? Guardian spheres, which could be, related to monks, and so protection, thought would be a sphere, for monks possibly, or wards. I mean, that's the thing, right? It becomes, these spheres are broad. Some of them are so broad that you end up being able to subsume the monk under it, I suppose.
Yeah. They have monks enjoy major access to the spheres of all, divination, guardian, numbers, and thought.
Yeah.
That is super weird. Like, because numbers and thought are way out there in function.
Right.
They're not bad or uninteresting, just this is not a monk that is going to play all that much like a first edition monk.
Well, the reason numbers, I think, is because of the idea of its connection to the universe, right? Numbers being part of the nature of the universe, right? When you look at the definition of numbers, it says It says priests with access to this sphere believe that numbers and mathematical relationships can provide insight into the nature of the universe.
Right. I can see the arguments for those spheres. I'm more thinking of the fact that the first edition monk isn't a spellcaster.
Oh, well, of course. Yes. I mean, that's already an issue.
At all.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
And so this is just a very different place.
Well, the idea is they're getting their sort of divine spellcasting power from their it's almost like the monk in this case is a like more of a sort of Tibetan Buddhist that finds themselves trying to be one with the universe, and therefore that gives them a supernatural power. Right, more so. I mean, I'm like you. That for sure. But since it's in the book, that's why I'm talking about it. Right. I mean, I in terms of its inclusion, yes, I'm circumspect, of course.
But it's interesting to have the crusader, the monk, and the shaman in this book at all, because they're not really well presented at all anywhere else. There is a monk in Faiths and Avatars, the Forgotten Realms supplement. And it is, I think, fairly related to this one. I don't recall if it's the same as this one, but I think Crusader is also in that book. So in a substantial portion, this book is drawing off of Faiths and Avatars, or vice versa. I don't remember which way that flows because I haven't looked at the publication dates. So anyway, we have the cleric, which is the same cleric as you'd expect, and there's a bunch of different ways to build a cleric based on sphere access, but that only changes spell access. It doesn't alter any of the other features. That spell access is your primary feature anyway. Then you have the Crusader, which is very, very close to being a paladin in concept, but with a much wider range of alignment possibilities. You have to be either lawful or chaotic in alignment, so you can be anything except neutral evil, neutral good, or true neutral. Why? Who knows? Anyway.
Yeah, they started to get a thing about true neutrality being bad.
Yeah, it's just not sort of explained why a neutral good character would not be a crusader for good. Anyway, the Crusaders advance in Theco like a warrior rather than like a priest, and so that's one of their main things. They're they skew very close to being warriors. At the same time, still have a fair amount of sort of cleric DNA going on. Druid is unchanged. Druid is exactly what you'd expect it to be based on second ed. We've already talked about monk, and then shaman is, man, a whole mess of problematic language just right there in the first paragraph. And
the first the first sentence.
Yeah. Like if you just wanted to make a super problematic cleric, this is how you do it. So anyway, I'm not going to go into depth on that one because I think we can pretty much give it a miss. But it is multiple pages of content because of how they work. They're a little bit the Sha'ir of the priest side, where they have spirits that do all of their heavy lifting.
Like that. Yeah, you're right. Huh.
But it's a little. It's not exactly that. It's a thing. Digging into this in detail would certainly be a lifestyle choice that I don't think we should make.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's an unfortunate artifact. I would hope that if something that was trying to do the same thing that this shaman sort of underclass did, if something were to be produced now that tried to do the same thing as this, I would hope that it would not have as many basically offensive items in it.
Yeah, you'd hope.
Yeah, it's extremely problematic. So yeah, we don't have to talk about it. I mean, I'm not to excuse it. It is definitely a product of its time. I don't say that as an excuse, just as a fact. But yeah, reading it now with 2019 eyes, it's like shake my head every third sentence.
So we get next the optional abilities, and if anything, there are more of these than there were for wizards. It's a lot, and
yeah. Well, because the priest gets what, like 100 point or 100? What is it? 120 points. Yeah.
Because they've got to buy every sphere individually.
Right.
So
exactly.
You have the option to, chop a bunch of spheres and you get a bunch of other stuff instead, which, I mean, again, is a fairly interesting approach if you keep your eyes on the narrative. Much like I said with a wizard, it is very easy to see how you could hang a whole campaign on wall-to-wall priests and not really have significant overlap. Right.
Yeah.
Like, you could stay with clerics and not have significant overlap
because of the point
buy. Because there's so many different ways to go here. You can have a very caster side cleric. You can have, I do some healing one way and I also do some healing a different way. By the way, did I mention that I heal?
Right.
So you can pretty much play the Green Bond from Monty Cook's Arcana Evolved, which was a major running joke / gripe in the Arcana Evolved game that I played. So there's a lot here, and it's compelling in its ways. But again, once you introduce the optional limitations, especially, it's really hard to not just sit there and sort of dicker over points and lose sight of, like, I'm trying to shape a character that is going to be a compelling figure in the world.
Well, and let's be honest, some of these limitations are going to make that character unplayable, right? Or can be totally ignored, and unless the DM is really on it, then you get free points.
Yeah, and having to know each character at the table in that kind of nuance just to keep the game balanced is sort of the untold story of the serious problem here.
Right.
Like, I think that fifth ed has shown us that asking the GMs to know all of a particular player's traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws in enough detail to trigger them is just not working out.
Right.
What if you had twice as many and each character's fundamental game balance relied on them? Still good?
Right.
Still good?
Well, that's similar to let's ask every 4th edition DM to know every single power and what exactly it does for every single character at the table. Not going to happen.
I would argue that the 4th edition situation is less needed.
Well, no,
because the player can explain it to you again, and it will probably be okay.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, as an ideal, if you expect your DM to know every single in and out of every single character that's from every player that's sitting at the table, it's just not going to happen, no matter what edition we're in.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, I run games and I also, it's one of the reasons I try to be a player, right? So I play in a game, and heck, I'm going through and like, oh, I didn't realize, this particular thing that I've had a player in my game that I'm running has been doing, they've been doing it wrong this whole time, right?
Yeah.
Not so much to the detriment that it's ruined a campaign or something, but that's a very common thing, because my goal as the DM is not to go around and memorize every single person's, as you said, ideals, bonds, flaws, traits, plus all their powers and how they work, plus all the rules. I mean, it's not possible. I would spend all of my time prepping just learning the mechanics, and I wouldn't run a very good game because of it. So the same thing was true for me in 2nd edition. The same thing was true for me in 4th edition. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Yep.
Now, that's a certain point of view. I'm well aware that's my own point of view, and that's the way I run things. And I'm loose enough as a DM that, you know what, if my player screws up, as long as they're not specifically trying to, fake out me or the other players or game the system, in a way that's extremely detrimental on purpose, then what do I care? Like, I just want us all to have fun. But, here's the thing. In this particular system, in this book, during second edition, to make these limitations meaningful, then the DM had to pay attention.
Yep, I certainly agree with that. And, it isn't like the DM doesn't already have plenty of cognitive load.
Right.
I mean, second ed was not as bad about cognitive load as third could be.
Sure.
Because even just understanding your monster's abilities was so taxing in even early mid-game third. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think we can probably move on to chapter 3. Do you think?
Sure. Yeah, chapters 1 and 2 kind of mirror each other, but one for the wizard group and one for the priest group. And I have basically the same complaints about the priest group that I have about the wizard group. And, there you go.
That's super fair.
Yeah.
So that brings us to chapter 3, which covers other spellcasters. And they don't get the kind of deep dive detail that wizards and priests did, but that's not the most surprising thing for a book like this. Though in fairness, bards are very close to being full-fledged casters in second, so I'm a little surprised to not see a bit more here.
Yeah, they get a page
Right.
and a quarter maybe.
Right,
Yeah.
And they have the option of school specialization, that kind of thing. That's all very cool, and they also have a few new options that are just intended to be tacked on to skills and powers for paladins and rangers, and then there's some business about multi-classed spellcasters and how all that should go.
Right.
Multi-classing is messy on the best of days.
Sure.
But once you're
talking about buying abilities and limitations,
right, and it just gets so convoluted if you have the individually bought features in a point buy system for each of 2 or 3 different classes,
right?
And you've got to resolve all those against each other. So this is trying to provide some guidance and support for that, but it's daunting.
Yeah, and it's just muddy. It's just muddy. And then there's a section on monsters and monstrous spellcasters versus monsters with spell-like abilities.
SLAs, man.
Yeah.
The utter weirdness of third ed monster design that is SLAs kills me.
I mean, whatever. There's not. Whatever. It's a decent section. It's. There's nothing.
Sure.
From the modern eye looking back, there's nothing like, wow, oh my god, about this. About this section.
Yeah, for sure. I only mention third ed because I'm still twitchy about it. Look, I have my trauma. Okay, it got weird and complicated to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
In monster design because of that set of words. Here they mean the same thing, but the design nuance hasn't drilled down to anything like that level. But it's worth noting, for example, all spell-like abilities have an initiative modifier of +3.
Right.
Or fast under player's option combat and tactics rules. So that's a dominating advantage if it's a spell that would otherwise be slow. So that's a whole thing. But ultimately, it's a very short chapter on other kinds of spellcasters just to make sure they cover their bases.
Right. It's the catch-all of the few little optional abilities that might be provided that tweak somebody's interest if they're playing a bard or a paladin. It's not really. And
the one really good thing that they do here is to discuss the types of specialist wizards and specialist priests that you can be well multiclassed. For our listeners who don't have a lot of experience with second ed multiclassing, it's important to understand that every legal multi-classing combination for a given race was listed on a table,
Right.
and if it wasn't listed, you couldn't do it.
Right.
It's extremely restrained, and there's an idea that it's supporting some kind of core story about who these races are and what they do. And if you can figure out what that story is from that table, you're doing a lot better than I am.
Yeah, it's one of those issues of enforced racial diversity, or
or something like it.
Yeah,
right?
it's an odd artifact of having multiple different types of species. Maybe is a better word.
Right. Well, and part of it is that they're trying to sell the idea that half-elves are some of the best multiclassers out there. They have more multiclassing options than anyone else, even in the running. And I mean, that's interesting.
Right. For example, gnomes cannot be crusaders, but half-elves,
right.
They can.
Right.
So presumably the psyche of the gnomish people does not allow them to fall more toward fanaticism and become a crusader. If they specialize in magic, they tend to be specialized in magic, whether it's divine or arcane, not in weapons and magic, which would be what a crusader would be. But
right.
Okay, whatever.
Right. These specialties are supposed to cost you character points. However, if the DM agrees, a limited number of additional specialties may be available to the multiclass character. Selecting one of these optional specializations costs a multiclass character 20 character points. Yeah. Or an experience point penalty of 20% for standard characters. Cool.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Just the whole second ed, first and second ed treatment of non-human PC races is such a cluster.
Well, and let's be honest, too. Theoretically, I could create a character that had limitations that were all experience point based and end up getting only 50% experience no matter what.
God, pass.
Right. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? It's not a small thing to say, well, you're the penalty of 20% experience. Really?
Yeah.
So
anyway, I think that brings us to the end of this chapter.
Yeah, to chapter 3.
Therefore, this episode.
I agree. So join us next time for proficiencies and equipment and a delve into the magic.